forum by JC and Anuradha. So over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Self-respect by definition is a confidence and a pride in knowing that your behavior is both honorable and dignified. One can earn respect by respecting others. A very good afternoon to one and all present here. I, Hajira Fatima, BCom 6th to 7A. It's a glorious moment to extend my warm wishes on the behalf of Indian Academy Degree College Autonomous, Center for Students Placement Service, and Anti-Sexual Harassment Committee in collaboration with my Athena. I want to convey my heartful gratitude to Ms. Nidhi Chouhan for accepting the invitation and presiding over this webinar on prevention of sexual harassment. Greetings to one and all. It gives me immense warmth and great pleasure to grace all of your presence in the interest of entire committee. It gives me a tremendous commitment to be presenting the welcome speech amongst the most esteemed personalities. I extend my sincere welcome to Honorable Chairman Dr. T. Somashekar, the Indian Academy in Education Trust, to the event. We welcome you, sir. We cannot proceed further without welcoming our Secretary, Ms. T. Bharati, the Indian Academy Education Trust, to the webinar. We welcome you, ma'am. Our respected CEO, Mr. Srinidhi K. Parthasarathi, Chief Operating Officer, in Indian Academy Group of Institutions. We welcome you, sir. And our beloved principal, Dr. E. Jerome Xavier, who always supporting, motivating, and inspiring us to take this initiative and successful accomplish it. We welcome you, sir. We are delighted to offer the most welcome we can to the resource person for the day, Ms. Nidhi Chouhan, who is a career and a leadership coach, HR advisor, startup consultant, and re-engineering facilitator. We welcome you, ma'am. My heartiest welcome to all the heads of departments, faculty members, and dear students. This session organized and conducted for the general audience to gain insight and information that would remain effective in the life, exercises, and work. The topic of the webinar was chosen keeping in the mind the interest of the society. It is indeed a great pleasure to have you all and your wishes to this webinar. We welcome you all. And on behalf of Indian Academy Degree College Autonomous and Anti-Sexual Harassment Committee, Center for the Student Placement Service, it's my immense pleasure to introduce our resource person, Ms. Nidhi Chouhan, who is a career and leadership coach, HR advisor, startup consultant, organization transformation, and a re-hiring facilitator. We are really thankful to you, ma'am, for taking the time out to her busy schedule to attend this webinar. Ma'am is a postgraduate in management from Delhi University and has been in HR arena for over 30 years. During she worked across industry and been responsible for delivering HR agenda at pan-India level, UAE and Asia Pacific region. Her core strength in defining, strengthening, and measuring the HR effectiveness has been instrumental in delivering the results in her capacity as CHRO in multiple startups, as well as organization re-engineering themselves to overcome the business challenges. She has been a core team member for 2 mergers and acquisitions and brings deep understanding of the HR developable for smooth transitions. Ma'am is also a certified coach, certified competence-based hiring and performance reviewer, and quality trainer and auditor. She spearheaded technology application in HR, having commenced at the first time a right implementation of HR models of Oracle and SAP. The presence of such a personality in our session is a blessing. We hope that the students are able to seek a little guidance and imbibe something from her thoughts. Thank you, ma'am. I hand over to ma'am.
Thank you very much, JC. Indeed, a very expanded introduction about me.
Hajira, ma'am.
Yes. And but what is important to know here is that my journey of 30 years across various kinds of industries and geography tells me that dealing with people is something which is common in terms of approach wherever we work. People come with their anxieties, whichever part of the world you work, their expectations, their motivations. So I think in HR, once you get to connect with people, pick up the cultural nuances of the country or the place or the organizations that you're working with, it starts all falling well into place. One added input to what JC has just spoken about me is that I also got the opportunity of being a core team member of the POSH committees. And when I was working with Bharti Airtel, I was the chairperson of the North committee, which actually gave me a lot of on ground experience in terms of not just training people on this area, but also, unfortunately, conducting certain inquiries. So, to the extent possible, with all efforts to maintain confidentiality, I would also like to bring some real life experiences for you to understand the concept better. Before I proceed, the broad agenda for the day. I think first 15 odd minutes I would like to spend in building your understanding on what exactly is to be understood as the sexual harassment at workplace. The second most important part, which I'm sure since you have a structured committee as part of your institute and which to me is very encouraging, is the process through which a harassment incident, if it ever happens, will have to be addressed. So we will see it both from the person who is aggrieved and also the person who's on the other end, which is the harasser. So we'll try and see what is to be done by them, and finally, and most important, the consequence management of a complaint when it happens. So we'll see all of this. My request, owing to technology constraints, is for you all to take notes as we proceed through the slides. I would be very happy to take as many questions that you have towards the end of the session. So with that, let's just kickstart. The Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, as we see, was passed in the year 2013. Does not mean that before 2013, companies were not cognizant of this problem area. In fact, 17 years before this, there was a committee called Vishakha Committee. Now, this was a composition of a couple of NGOs, primarily from Rajasthan, few from Delhi, which started addressing these issues. So it was them and the state, and the issues on table helped issue some guidelines which most of the organizations were following. But giving enough importance to this, the state acted very fast, and came this formal act which is called Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act in 2013. This act is applicable to all of India, so the complete geography. It applies to organized as well as the unorganized sector, and some of you may be surprised to know that even the domestic servants who work in your homes are eligible to claim benefit of this act. Like I said, before the act, companies followed various guidelines. So some were very cognizant, extremely aware. So these companies had a stipulated process of how to handle the problem if it ever happened. And probably there were some companies where there was no action taken if there was ever an aggrieved woman, so to say. So ACT in that sense has been a big step forward in institutionalizing the complete process. Now that we have the ACT, and you also have a committee in your college, you would know, since the enactment, it is binding on every organization and institute to adopt this act in its entirety. We will understand what does entirety mean. And they are also accountable to report back to the government agencies as appointed region-wise. So as a result, this is not something which is not monitored, which is not measured for effectiveness. This is by far one of the most important acts in the labor category currently. From the company standpoint, since the act has come about, it has been made mandatory for every company to make a POSH policy. Every company institute is supposed to publish it extensively. So I'm sure as you move around your college, you would have seen some of this on your notice boards. And not just to publish, because everybody must understand the policy in the same manner. As a result, training of workforce or training of student force is extremely important from the organization stroke institute point of view. And as a result, we're sitting here today trying to educate all of us into what it means and what it could entail. An important ingredient is the consequence management process. Like they say, what gets measured gets done. So what is left open-ended will never be concluded. So as a result, end of every unfortunate incident, there is a clear definition of how we will deal with the findings that come about as a result of a POSH process. I hope the pace is okay. If not, then one of you could raise hands and or tell me. I'll slow down. So let's begin by first building our understanding in terms of what could be termed as a sexual harassment. But before I start, let me also tell you, like the second point here says, in the current context, many organizations had this insight when people came and said sexual harassment may not necessarily only be for women. There have been men who've been subjected to multiple kinds of situations. As a result, organizations have now expanded their definition and said anybody who goes through a harassing experience, more so on the sexual front, could approach the authorities under this act. Now, simply put, sexual harassment at the workplace is considered from the Act's definition violation of a woman's right to equality, life, and liberty. Equality is extremely important because, as we've seen, corporate world especially is moving towards a huge diversity of men and women, people from various regions, people from various cultures. So it makes extremely important that not only are you able to hire the right people, you're also able to offer them a workplace which respects diversity, which gives them equal opportunity, which respects them for the person they are, and enable them to live a life of fulfillment. Uh, this is to this actually creates ensures that any place where people feel insecure or there is hostile work environment, the organization by definition of POSH will make sure that all of these are addressed and ensuring there is no adverse effect on all of its employee force in living a life of fulfillment. Only when people are absolved of all these worries, when I don't have to watch my back, will they contribute their optimum best. Also, when initial training started happening for people in this area, they realized the definition was really wide. So let's just on the opening comment see what does it mean. Uh, Anything which is an unwelcome act of behavior, which could fall in the bucket called physical contact and advances, a demand or request for sexual favors, making sexually colored remarks, the jokes, or you use certain terms in your language. I'll give you some examples about that. Also showing pornography. Now, a lot of these things people do saying, but I'm friends with her and I thought she wouldn't mind. The act very clearly says the right to define what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior sits with the woman. So it's her comfort which will help first define whether it is an act of sexual harassment or not. Finally, unwelcome physical, verbal, non-verbal, whatever conduct which puts a woman at a discomfort is categorized as sexual harassment. When I started training people in my capacity as CHRO on this topic, uh, um, people used to joke about it. It used to be a session where there was a lot of frivolous comments coming on table. So over period, we had to make the environment extremely guarded, and we said this is serious business. And any act which is violation will call for serious actions, and termination will not be something from which the management would shy away. That built acceptance. A simple thing we conveyed to all the men in the organization was to start respecting personal space of a woman, actually of anyone. But in the context of the act, we spoke about women, and we said, when talking to a woman, ensure you maintain a 3 feet distance. Right up to the leadership members, we realized it did become a matter of joke, but over period, we were able to send across a very strong message which said, you have to be conscious of the way you conduct yourself vis-a-vis women, starting from the physical aspect of it. The Sexual Harassment Act, the provisions, if you were to ask me, this section helps women to understand from her standpoint, will the act understand the way she experiences life. Now, anytime a woman goes through an explicit promise of preferential treatment. So what is a preferential treatment? If it is about a lady working in an organization, so if you know, I would like to have more time spent with you, will you come out and have coffee with me? I will put you on the list of promotion candidates for the year, or I will make sure you go to premium training programs, or I will make sure you get very high increments compared to your other colleagues in the department. The moment there is explicit promise of a preferential treatment, implied saying that you will give me something in return, is a sexual harassment. This same thing could be approached by a few other people as a detrimental treatment. So, a woman who's not really warming up to them, if they start withdrawing them from important meetings in the organization, they don't include them in forums which are of importance to the company, this is called detrimental treatment. And if a woman knows the trigger is because she is not giving into personal expectation of this gentleman, this will be called as a sexual harassment act. There have been many instances where reporting managers, people higher up in the hierarchy, men in the organization use very open threat, saying that I'm going to put a dot on your performance standards and make sure you don't have this job. Job insecurity does many things to people. We spend a many number of years, we spend a lot of money in acquiring the right knowledge. And then comes that dream job. Now, in that dream job, if I am being valued and rewarded for some appeasing acts that I do for other people, and if I don't do, I get threatened, is a serious case of sexual harassment. Any kind of humiliating behavior. So many a times when a woman does not give in to the requests or forceful ask, the person experiences humiliation in the meeting. So you speak about something, you are publicly told that you know nothing. And repeated acts of this start impacting not just the psychological health of the person, it may also start reflecting on the physical health, feelings of not feeling safe in this organization. So when all these kinds of definitions started getting included in the training sessions, both ends, which is women in the organization, understood that, oh, it's not just the act of somebody touching me the wrong way. It is also the act of somebody speaking with me the wrong way, could be sexual harassment, a certain level of confidence built amongst the women. Likewise, on men who were showing a certain traits of demonstrating this kind of behavior, research has said that some amount of fear did set in. that I am being watched. My behavior could be understood by others as an act of sexual harassment. So, education formed the most important building block after the act was formalized. The changes, the categories, if we may see, so there are two ways people will get into the act of sexual harassment. One is the quid pro quo, which says, you give me this, in return, I will do this for you. So you come out for a coffee with me in the evening. I will make sure you are sent for a premium training program or something like that. So whenever there is a give and take in something, this could be an act of sexual harassment. If there are conditions being put to the person, as in there is an outstation travel, a lady who needn't travel, let's say she is on a payroll basis, but she's being forced to travel with her reporting manager, obviously an act of sexual favor, and saying that I will put you up for promotion is a case of sexual harassment. And of course, like I said, career advancement, promotions, or benefits of any kind. For instance, you want leave during a festival season, which also happens to be the business peak. I will make sure that you get leave. Now, this preferential treatment in return for a sexual favor is an act of sexual harassment. But there are other kinds of managers or men in the organization which may not follow the quid pro quo approach. They will just start creating a very, very hostile work environment for the lady. This, clubbed with her own extreme necessity to have that job, may push her into giving into some sexual wants or asks of this manager. So, though it is not a this for that, when being pushed to wall, people may at times give in to these kind of unfortunate incidents. And please understand, hostile work environment and managers making it tough for women happens to be the most prevalent form of sexual behavior. Why? Because over years, even the managers have become a lot more educated. Even men understand how will a woman go and speak about what is a discomforting situation for her. So have to be consciously aware of what categories the sexual harassment could happen. Now, for us to understand, both for men, women, people in the senior levels, people who are starting afresh, is to understand what is meant by sexual harassment by the acts, the kind of behaviors we demonstrate. Now, simply put, anybody may tell you verbal comments is a harassment, non-verbal, physical contact, or even printed material. But that is not good enough. I think for you to understand it, also for you to be able to speak with others, educate others, you yourself has to clearly understand what all of this actually means. Now, if I was doing this with you in a workshop model in a classroom, we will make it far more interactive. But since we don't have that beautiful opportunity, for now, we will live with this more in terms of a lecture mode. But verbal comments. So what does it mean? I've already spoken about the threats. I'll make sure you don't have this job. The most frequent instance that happens in organized sector is the sexual jokes. Now, with a handphone in the hand, with email IDs, with whatever social media available to us, people send out all kinds of jokes. There are WhatsApp groups on which people send these jokes. I must say, some women are very comfortable with it, not because they like it, but because probably in the emotional intelligence ladder, they are very high up. Maybe in the age they are able to accept and ignore. But there are few who get very offended. So, sexual jokes of any kind that one sends or receives is a serious act of sexual harassment. And like I said, it is for the woman to decide, was she discomforted by this? Two, uh, in the office, we have many people who have this habit of whistling. Now, when we see it happening on the streets outside, we understand it, but when it happens in the office, or people making those very irritating kinds of noises like growling, etc., this is an act of harassment. And a woman can actually file a complaint saying repeated acts of this kind by this gentleman makes me feel very harassed. Describing sexual aspects of one's physical attributes. So talk to a woman, and there are men who would say, I find your backside very sexy. This is one of the real instances I am narrating here. Or while walking past a woman, patting her on the back. We may have seen some of this in movies, and we've seen times when it's being spoken about, saying it's an act of harassment. But many men take it for granted, and especially men in a position of authority give themselves this right, saying, I can do anything, it's my team member. So not acceptable. It's a clear act of harassment. Remarks linking, verbally threatening people. Many people get into personal inquiries which are completely unrelated to work. And women come from various backgrounds, various cultures, even religious backgrounds. So not many will be very open to speak about it. Now, for instance, a woman applies for a leave. The manager says, what do you want the leave for? I'm planning a vacation with my family. Oh, so is it a honeymoon now? Now, many women may find this very offending. Again, this is a real life case that used to happen. Or some people asking, oh, you're going out with your husband or your boyfriend? Now, culturally, not on with many people. So be very, very conscious of what kinds of inquiries we make. Unless it's related to work, it needn't be done. I would say, even if you are great friends with a woman in your team, be very, very watchful of the kind of verbal statements, comments, inquiries that we make of women. And from the women point of view, if anything puts you at a discomfort, please go and speak with somebody of authority. Does not mean you are registering a complaint. It's your job to go and sensitize the management, institute authorities, saying, here is something that happens on a repeated frequency, and I don't think I can be wrong after 10 such experiences, so I want to tell you there's a problem. The last one is actually very, very common. As we are growing younger in the organizations, as we are growing multinationals, as we have more and more young, diverse people working in the organizations, our language has become very casual. No longer offices are a place of formal interaction. In fact, many organizations go out saying we don't have a formal work culture. But that does not mean that you start addressing your women colleagues as honey, baby, my darling, oh, my sweetheart, can you do this for me? Many managers do it with a lot of flair, and probably get away with it. So don't let other people copy what that manager does. Maybe he gets away with it, all may not. So be very, very watchful. Office is a place of work. For a woman, you have to respect her, what she is bringing on table as her technical competence, the job that she does for you. Ask her for the job deliverables, she will do it. And if your manager at any point in time is crossing those boundaries by constantly using words which do not sound like music to you, please raise a flag. So likewise, out of your own experience or your friend's experience, you may actually further add to this list any kinds of verbal use of behavior if putting a woman at a discomfort is an act of harassment. Let's spend a few minutes on non-verbal. Staring at someone. Now, this is something which is prevalent in our society anyway. We just love staring at people. Ask any woman who's part of this group today, at the marketplace, in a mall, in a movie theater, in a bus, public transport. People just shamelessly stare at you. At least in an organized setup, if we see this happening, we can talk about it. Let me give you an instance. One of the cases of sexual harassment that I've handled was when there was a Skype meeting The boss was logged in from location X and his entire team was logged in from location Y. Now there is a reporting manager of the man who was called the harasser at the end of this, was chairing the meeting. Now, every time this camera panned towards this lady in his team, he would text her on the phone saying, "Why aren't you smiling? I'm only looking at you. Can you please smile?" And every time she was wanting to focus on the meeting, came a WhatsApp message. Now, she was saying, "This is to me, stalking me on a Skype meeting. Why is he saying I'm staring at you?" Blowing kisses may sound a little over the top, but this is something which many people do. Winking. And many managers, many men will say, "But that's my style. I've always done it." So if you've done it, but it's no longer acceptable, then winking is not the right behavior. And of course, the fourth one is what I grossly detest. But yes, licking your lips in a very suggestive manner, any body language which will put any woman, not just woman, even men in that room at discomfort, is a complete no-no of a behavior. Last one is again something which we are not very sensitive about. And these are the examples I've given here are real life examples. And I would say this is not just from the men. Even women at times will say, "Oh, I didn't think it was the wrong behavior." So see what it reads here. So manipulating part of your anatomy or your clothing in a group, adjusting your trouser zipper, your bra strap, or starting to tuck your shirt inside your trouser in a forum is clearly not the right behavior. Whether or not somebody starts calling it as sexual harassment is a secondary matter. This body language or non-verbal behavior that we demonstrate is not acceptable. There are restrooms for this. There are washrooms for this. Go into a small meeting room if you have to readjust your piece of clothing, but never in public. It puts a lot of people at a gross discomfort. Even if it does not, it's not an acceptable official behavior. Let's move to the next one, which is the printed material. Now, with the advent of all the SMSs, the WhatsApp, the emails, and all kind of mediums that we have with us, people have to be very cognizant of what are they sending to people. The way we address people, the kind of email messages that we send out to people, very harassing in tone, insinuating that for a favor, I will tone this down or I will save your job and stuff, is not acceptable. You will, when you walk around offices, not many of you may have worked earlier, but many people have this tendency of putting some stickers, cartoons on their work desk, or even pictures, which may be very offending at times. Now, from their standpoint, they would say, "Oh, I'm very young at heart. I like putting all this because this is so on. Oh, but I saw it in the newspaper, so I have this cutting on my desk." You always have to look at the universe you are in at a point in time and then decide. Emotional intelligence is very important here. Trust me, there is no one who does not know that I am getting into a wrong act or a wrong behavior. Most of us know it and we will be cautious, but there are many people who are not cognizant of this and they will anyway go and do things like this. On the last one, I have a good example. We used to have those famous Kingfisher calendars, no longer. There was a gentleman in a team. He circulated that calendar to 3-4 women in his team. Now, 2 of them spoke and they said, "I just don't like it. This was on my phone. Suppose if my husband saw it, he'll be very offended." And yes, those are the equations in marriage. We don't know what is happening at the home front for all these women. And for them to be seen as exchanging these kind of messages can cause them a lot of personal stress. Irrespective of personal stress, these women came and said, "Is this something a male colleague should be sending me?" And we had to take up this case through an inquiry process. The gentleman came up and said, "This calendar is available on social media. So why ask me?" So we said, What made you feel it had any official purpose in sending this calendar to the women in your team? And that's where started the whole process. And we had to have a serious reprimand done for this person. So printed material where we believe that it's not a verbal behavior, it's not a non-verbal behavior in a forum. This is a one-on-one. The woman can bring it and say that this is an act of harassing me. I don't like this. I have told the gentleman. In subsequent slides, we will see how you could address this. But yes, even on the first instance, a woman can come and say, not an acceptable behavior. What the point is, what I'm trying to highlight here is that the act, I believe, is extremely inclusive. It is not saying that a woman has to go through the ultimate act of getting molested to be able to file a sexual harassment complaint. Anything in the logical space puts her at discomfort is a case of sexual harassment. The rest of aspects in terms of how the committee investigates is a different matter. But the woman, so long as she wants to take charge of her own life and experiences, the act is extremely and highly supportive. Let's see one last category, which is the physical contact. This is very commonplace. You know, men going and putting their arm around men is very common. Many women are okay with it, but most of the women are not okay with it. Now, there are men who will understand, there are men who will not understand. So touching, touching the hand while talking in a meeting, when you want to interject in a meeting, rather than saying, hold on, I have a point, they will put their hand on the woman's hand like this. She may not like it. It's her prerogative. So it's extremely important to be not showing this behavior. This actually can be in the reverse also. One of my experiences on this, now I don't think it was a case of sexual harassment, but one of my own senior lady colleagues had this habit of touching the jacket collar of men. You know, she will just dust like this. I hope you can see. While talking to them, she will very softly do this. I don't think it was a sexual harassment, but it so happened that two men in leadership came and said, I don't understand why she does it. And we had to go and sensitize this lady, saying, while you do this to show your caring nature or friendly nature, this is not being perceived like that by the receiving person, or it puts him at a discomfort. So like I said, the definition expands to address discomfort of anyone. So, interesting, because I always like to take a very balanced view of things. So I mentioned this example to you. Pinching, grabbing, kissing, cornering, it does happen in offices. It does happen for domestic servants. It does happen for women in public transport. It does happen for women in malls. There are places where you can address it, because in an open mall, you can only address it by either going one-on-one or engage your family. But whenever in an organized setting, please do address this and say this was a gross act of discomfort. Blocking a passageway. This is something which is very commonplace. Men do it as, a little bit of a fun at workplace. You're walking, it's a narrow way, they will not let you pass. And finally, when you go, they will say, hi, how are you? It does not tone down the gross misconduct. So doing this is, again, is wrongful behavior. Providing unsolicited back or neck rubs. This is also very commonplace. Now, for many of you who've never worked in offices, some of this may sound like saying, really? But this actually happens. So people will come, stand behind you, and you just make a comment saying, my God, the whole day I've been working, I'm so tired. And in a very friendly manner, they put their thumbs and they start rubbing your neck. Unacceptable behavior. And like I said, in terms of physical contact, adjusting your personal clothing or anything, Anything that visually is not a normal behavior, more so in the Indian context, is a clear case of harassment. Whether or not the lady decides to pursue it, it's her choice. But if she does anything that is crossing a line or her personal space, putting her at discomfort, making her feel completely humiliated in a setting, making her feel unsafe when traveling alone, making her feel unsafe in a meeting room alone with this gentleman, are all an act of harassment. So where does the right thing start? One, of course, is the act has been provided by the government. But what we do with all the provisions is a major accountability residing with leadership. Now, in institutions or NGOs, it's the head of organizations. In the corporate world, etc., it's HR and the leadership, the CEO. Somebody very senior in the hierarchy takes the ownership. Their job is to ensure that the workplace is safe for all and a clean workplace for all. By cleanliness, I don't mean sanitized. Clean of anything which could be an offending act for people working there. It is leadership accountability to ensure that there are not just one-time induction training for people to tell them what is not an acceptable behavior in my company, but they must conduct regular refresher training programs. People tend to forget. So it is very important for leadership to make sure there is a woodpecker effect around areas of critical importance. Now, whether that is company code of conduct, which speaks of company values like integrity, not cheating on people, etc., and prevention of sexual harassment. Leadership also has to make a very structured and very conscious effort in making sure that the work culture is of openness and mutual trust. If we have a POSH policy, but the employees are not encouraged to be open, there is a problem. Every time you come up and lodge a complaint, if somebody starts victimizing you, which is how we started in the culture. Every time a woman complained, we said, but look at the way you dress up. Your clothes are always so revealing. You wear short skirts. Your cleavage is always showing. The onus of making sure that she is not harassed always sits with the woman. Of course, the HR of any company goes and defines the uniforms, the way you should dress up, the do's and the don'ts, and all of that. But more often than not, the leadership has to make sure that everybody can trust and rely on the organization culture. When in trouble, I can speak about it. This can only be done top down. There are issues of culture which can build up bottom up. But anything as important and critical as POSH has to be owned up first by the leader, then it will cascade down in a structured manner. So my urge, I'm sure your institute is doing a great job. Wherever you all go and work tomorrow, make sure there is enough sensitization that you do for not just the women, also the men. And every opportunity, speak about it. Now let's spend some few minutes before getting into a formal harassment complaint. What are the techniques through which you can address an encounter that you had? One is, of course, a direct approach. Somebody does something to you, go and speak about it. And if possible, speak in front of two people. Say that every time I'm in a meeting, you're staring at me at very wrong places. I don't like this. Men tend to ogle at cleavages. I mean, it happens all the time. Please say that in the open forum. Go as direct as you can. But there are situations where you cannot. What is that? This is your immediate reporting manager or the HOD. Most unfortunate, it's the leader of the organization. Then write a letter and copy it to 3 other people, because you may not have the courage to go all out and do this as a confrontation. Third, engage a third party. If you have some senior woman leader in the company, or there is somebody who's very senior in the hierarchy, a male member, but you trust him, engage him. and say that, sir, I have a problem. I want to tell you about it because help me address this, even before it becomes a formal complaint. Last, of course, approach the chain of command. Every office, every good organization has a grievance redressal procedure. If you have a problem with anyone, it could be a man, it could be a woman, it could be higher up, it could be a team member, a peer. So there is a chain of command, a redressal process which is defined, approach through that. But if you decide to pursue a sexual act which is discomforting through POSH, then there are 3 stages that need to happen. Foremost, you are supposed to file a complaint in writing. POSH complaint can never be verbal because there is another person involved. It's his credibility, his job, his opportunities also at stake. So just to start at a very common balanced platform, every internal complaint committee will ask you to file a written complaint. The first port of call is to arrive at a conciliation, which is make these 2 people come and sit on the table, talk about it. The woman has all the rights to say what discomforted her. The male member has the right to say, I'm so sorry, I didn't know that I was doing this to you. There are times when it is actually a case of miscommunication or picking up wrong signals, and things may get settled and never repeated again. However, if this one fails, then a formal inquiry is the only way in which you can take a particular case to its logical conclusion. What is important for you to remember? From a woman's standpoint, if you do nothing, most likely nothing would be done. Because the first person who has to take charge in a situation which is not positive for you is to do something about it. If you decide not to lodge a complaint, if you decide not to speak with somebody in your team, if you decide just to not do anything about it, don't expect the world to come and support you. So take charge of your life, take charge of your experiences, whether in the office space, in your home, wherever you interact with people. Girls, take charge. Be responsible for your own life's experiences. For the men, many a times they come and say, oh, but I didn't know. Nobody told me that I can't whistle in office. Nobody told me that putting an arm around is an act of sexual harassment. So, must understand, ignorance is no longer a bliss. It is your job to know. It is your job to find out what is right, what is not right. Because once you've gotten into the act and you choose to go by this alibi, which we've all done for many years, but I didn't know. So not knowing is no longer going to be your safeguard. The ball is always in the harasser's court to prove the innocence. It is not for the girl who's feeling aggrieved to prove that she's been harassed. She files a complaint through and through. It's the harasser who has to prove that he was not a culprit. The girl will only come to corroborate what he says or negate what he says. From the organization point of view, the leadership has to be extremely aware that no employee lodging a complaint has to be victimized. When this happens, many a times organizations do not treat it with sensitivity. They will land up speaking about it. Or a comment like saying, this woman has a problem with everyone. Oh, she is not a performer, so she tries to use all these things to get attention. Oh, but this woman loves attention. So on every small thing, she will raise a flag. So organizations have to be very cognizant of these behavior should they ever be happening. So let's now understand formally what is the process. So first, like I said, of every organization needs to have the act published in the office, and more relevant is its own policy on prevention of sexual harassment. It should go up on the notice board. People have to be trained, and this has to be constantly reiterated to employees. As part of this policy, organization is bound to mention a committee called the Internal Complaints Committee with their contact details and email address. So when in need, a woman needn't go around asking for how do I reach her or him. All contact details have to be made available. The committee members on their part have to be trained to be committee members. They have to be taken through a sensitivity training to be able to become extremely good value adders into this whole movement called creating a positive work culture. Their role in this accountability area has to be understood as something which is of a very high order. This is not a miscellaneous task. So let's say committee members is a lady who's the CHRO. There is another person who's a male member. He comes from the branding and marketing team. He cannot be allowed to treat his POSH membership as an ICC member as secondary. So at the year end, when his performance will be measured, he will also be measured on what constructive, positive contribution he made in that space. So it is not an also or an added task. To be a member of Internal Complaint Committee is a core accountability. The committee also has been defined to ensure there is a balance. Good committees are where women, of course, will be the leading. They are supposed to form at least 50% membership to the ICC. There could be men chosen, ideally if they are higher up in the hierarchy, somebody who's very sensitive, shows a caring behavior and would like to invest in this area. And the third important is to have external members. This is to ensure there is all kind of biases taken away. Sorry. These members could be from an NGO. More often than not, they are chosen with some amount of legal understanding that they bring on table. Because in the corporate, in the organization, let's say there is a lady who heads the legal department and she becomes the chairperson of a committee, great. Then you may just go and choose somebody from any NGO. But it is always good to have somebody with a legal background as your representative. And more often than not, it comes from the external resources, unless the organization is lucky. Bottom line, 50% members of this committee will always be women. Like I said initially, it is extremely important that the complaint is made in writing. So it will come either through email or the lady can handwrite and give it to any one of the committee members. But this complaint has to be filed within 3 months of the incident. Also, if the incidents are recurring, then it has to be 3 months from the last incident that happened. Remember, I gave you example of somebody staring at you again, staring at you more. So when you make a reference, you have to say the last incident happened on that day. And it should not be more than 3 months from the incident. Why? Because even addressing an incident gets easier because you'll have some people who will come as witnesses. Maybe this person didn't act and has exited the company. Now, what do you expect the organization to do? For them to go outside their scope of power, if I may use the word, it's very difficult. So 3 months, remember that. On the committee's point, they are expected to study the complaint, understand the complaint, and after discussing amongst themselves, they have to issue a show cause notice to the harasser. And this has to happen within 10 days of receiving the complaints. They can't endlessly sit on it. Because remember, the woman who's filed a complaint is now very disturbed because she's taken a stance. So she wants to know what happened. So you issue a show cause notice to the harasser and inform the woman. So she knows she's been heard. Also, the process of investigation must be completed in 90 days because what stretches beyond loses to have its meaning. Now refer to all the legal cases that we see in the courts of law in India. The most gruesome acts are not concluded after years. And I think after a certain period, even if you conclude a case, it doesn't have its impact. not to the person who was aggrieved, not to the person who committed the act, and not to the larger society. So it's very important that the act ensures the complaint is addressed within 90 days. And after this period of 90 days, the internal complaint committee is supposed to file a formal report to the administrative head of the organization, if demanded as, if he's been defined as the receiving authority, or the HR department, if that's the port of call for this purpose. But the entire process, like I said, complaint to be filed within 3 months, show cause notice in 10 days, investigation in 90 days, and final report completed and submitted in 10 days. This is sacrosanct. Why I'm saying sacrosanct is because all these complaints that happen, even if there is zero POSH complaint, the organization is supposed to file a report with the designated authority. So if there was a case, there is a case summary that goes, this was the case, this was the committee, this was investigation, finding, and the action. Or they are supposed to say we had no complaints, but they have to file a report. Finally, the leadership accountability again comes into play. No position or person in the organization can overrule the recommendations of the internal complaint committee. So if the internal complaint committee says this was a supreme act of harassment and our recommendation is that this person be terminated with immediate effect, nobody can question this. Only thing we can do is put members into this committee who are extremely mature. They will not take a biased decision. These are people who will rely on a lot of data, information, are very analytical, etc., so that we bring the margin of error towards the harasser to a 0 point. And that's where construct of the internal complaint committee becomes very critically important. So choosing right members to the committee is very important. Remember, for becoming an ICC member, you have to have very good people skills. You have to have great communication, because when you speak, the other person exactly understands what you're trying to say. Because many people fumble with their words, many people make errors in their communication, which could be grammatical, but they convey a completely different meaning. So choosing an internal complaint committee is a matter of skill and art by the leadership. So that's something which one has to be very cognizant of. What happens when the inquiry process is on? So while the inquiry is still underway, a woman has the right to go and ask, movement to another workplace. So she may say, the harasser is my reporting manager. Can you transfer me to another manager's team? She can also say, I work in this branch. Can you move me to another branch? Because to come face to face with this person every day is very mentally challenging for me. So if asked, organization must support. There are instances where a woman feels extremely mentally, in certain cases, physically drained. And she says, I cannot attend office. So organization is bound to give her leave. Trust me, no woman misuses this. Most of us are hardcore professional, if not more, equal to men. So no woman wants to misuse this. She will only ask for this if she's not able to cope up with the pressure of what has happened to her. Also grant other relief to aggrieved women, which may be, for instance, many of them would say, I travel in the company bus where this gentleman is also there. Can you help me? So reimbursement of a taxi fare, many such instances is what the organization invests in. Like I said, inquiry report has to come within 10 days. There are two parts to the report. One is, of course, the finding and the resultant action. A very important component of this report is to specify the compensation that the harasser or the respondent is supposed to be giving to this woman. Now, what is this compensation for? This is for all the mental trauma, the pain, the suffering, distress at family end, all of that she's gone through. Many women lose career opportunities because of this. It's also something which is research data. Even if the cases are closed in the favor of women, many of them choose to exit the organization. Just the pressure of living in the same place gets too much for them. So there is compensation, taking this into cognizance. There are some acts which are purely physical in nature, which has left the woman scarred and she has to go through medical treatment. Or some of them go through psychiatric treatment. They start obsessing over the man who's harassing them. Now, this demands a compensation by the harasser. There could be income, financial loss to these people. Also keeping in mind, if she is the only bread earner of her family, if she is the only child working for retired parents, or she is spending and supporting education of her younger siblings, all that has to be taken into account. But finally, just to be following a mature balanced equation, the feasibility of payments also has to be seen from the harassers or the respondent's point of view. So can he pay all of that in lump sum? Organizations do installments for that. Organizations also at times pay lump sum on his behalf and recover from his salary, but compensation is integral to the conclusion of a sexual harassment complaint. Last and extremely important guideline is that notwithstanding anything contained in the Right to Information Act, it is completely prohibited to make known either the contents of the complaint or the name of the complainant or the name of the person who was harassing her. This is in the spirit of ensuring confidentiality is maintained. Why? Because hope is that at the completion of this process, life should go back to its normal form, which means even if these two people were in a same department, they should be able to coexist. This can only happen if this entire process remains between the two of them. As a result, witnesses who are brought in to contribute data, information, revalidate, etc., are also sworn to secrecy. If they go out and speak frivolously, speak casually, make a joke out of it, they are equally liable to action by the Internal Complaint Committee. These are the guidelines which make sure that all people involved feel complete controlled environment under which they are operating. After the complaint, what happens? The investigation may throw up various kinds of findings. Yes, it was an act of harassment, but this is not something which we cannot correct as an organization. Yes, this was an act of harassment, but we can take this woman through counseling. Because genuinely speaking, there are times when the committees have gone back to a woman saying, if you are traveling in public transport, you also have to equip yourself to deal with the situation. The state police cannot come and control and give you safety. Like we say, all women should invest in self-defense. It's our life, end of the day. What happens to me in the public transport, in the open park, what happens to me inside the closed walls of an office, or what happens to me at home? I must take charge of this. I must make myself strong. So that's one part. Two, if the case was of that magnitude that it requires intervention of external authorities, organizations have gone and filed a police complaint. The internal complaint was registered by one woman. Let's say this was extreme acts of physical harassment. And after this happened, they discovered through the witness interaction sessions that there are many more. And this is a behavior which cannot be corrected. And there are severity involved. There are police complaints that have been filed. The most severe act of punishment that is given to respondent or harasser is termination of services. Termination by far is the most detrimental thing that can happen to an employee. Why? Because he is not choosing to exit. He doesn't have the right to resign. The company issues him a notice and says, we don't want your service. So two things happen. One, his full and final settlement does not happen. His all leave accruals do not get encashed. All benefits that were accrued to him will not get paid because his termination demands that action. Also, when tomorrow he goes and applies for other jobs, companies would normally say, show me your relieving letter. Can I do a ref check with your previous organization? Antecedent verifications. Very high probability that his wrong conduct and behavior anyway got highlighted in many forums. So that's the ultimate act of punishment. There are companies which do a suspension of service. So they will say 3 months, you will not come to office and this will be without pay. This is a huge deterrent to people who are service class. 3 months, you don't get that. Also, there are companies which say, even if you're a star performer, you will not get promoted for the next 2 years. Now, this is something which is a major, major setback to a performing asset of any organization. Increment being stopped is the most easy punishment, I would say. So for the next 3 years, we will give you no increment. So even if you do higher level work, better work, good work, great sales, we will not give you increment. So in many ways, these are pushes that an employee may feel and leave the organization. And in the most cases where the complaint is not found to be of a very serious nature, you still take cognizance of the woman feeling the discomfort and ask the respondent to write a written apology, which goes into his personal folder. So today it was not a severe act, but it's in his file for future reference. Tomorrow, this minor behavior should not turn into a major harassing behavior pattern. Respondent, of course, in the spirit of natural justice that our law provides, he can, of course, go and appeal to the higher court or to the tribunal. So he may say that I don't go by what the internal committee has said. I want to go external and file an appeal against what has been the finding. More often than not, it doesn't reach this stage, unless probably, I don't know whether politically right for me to say this or not, but when dealing with hardened criminals, this may happen. But if it's an act of sexual harassment that happens in the four walls of an organization, a home, or wherever, after enough investigation, inquiry process, data, information, witnesses on table, and just the pressure of facing the internal complaints committee is enough to prove whether the man was on the right or not on the right. So that's the consequence management process. A few words of caution once again, because I do see we have some members of ICC in this forum here. Many of you may grow to become members to ICC in the future. Even at our individual level, organization level, of course, we have to be very cognizant and maintain confidentiality of the complainant and the respondent. I very, I would say when Nirbhaya happened, this is 2013, this was the first time there was an organized response from the women. You know how we are very inquisitive as a culture? Who was she? What was her name? Where did she live? Who's her father? We want to know who that person is. We want to see her picture. And that was the year whenever in a forum there was a question, many women stood up and said, I am she. Look at the power we created around this act. We said, today it's her, tomorrow it could be me. So that was me. Talk to me. So maintain confidentiality, ensure both complainant and the respondent are not spoken about in the open place. Because even respondent, till the time proven guilty, should get the place of respect. Zero interference during investigation process. It is possible. Some people may call you. Some people in even government machinery may call you. You know, you are conducting an investigation against my nephew, and I happen to be factory inspector. So this is empowerment of the internal complaint committee of ensuring nobody can cause any interference in this process. There are times when there are financial settlements offered at the onset of an inquiry, a very commonplace thing. I think anything that goes into the court of law, the first port of call is always, can I compensate? There is no door in this particular act for a financial settlement. Once it is with the ICC, they cannot close a complaint by saying, please financially compensate the person and we are okay. The compensation, if at all, is only at the end, after the inquiry is completed, to compensate the woman for all that she has gone through. All the witnesses that are given by either the complainant and or the respondent have to be involved during the investigation process. This is again in the spirit of being fair to both of them. Every little detail that gets spoken in this forum or presented as a data has to be documented. This is almost like a scribe who sits there and writes every little detail that gets spoken or presented. Finally, the ICC has to bring it to a very formal close after the investigation is complete, write a formal report. The last part of the report is the recommendation of the ICC, and it gets submitted to the manager, who is either the administrative head, or like I said, it could be the CHRO or whoever is designated as the person authorized to receive these reports. Word of caution, POSH, like any other act, can be used for both the right reasons and the wrong reasons. There have been instances where it's been used by certain women for settling their personal scores. So my manager did not promote me. And there are instances where she goes and says, you know, he asked me out for a coffee, or he said, can I travel outstation with him? I didn't, so I have not been promoted. Or likewise for the desired role, the increments, or just the fact that some women like attention. And this manager never praises me. So it's the personal vendetta. So POSH, the internal complaint committee, has to make sure it's not being misused. Also remember, in case the investigation process proves that the complainant has filed either a false complaint or a complaint with wrong intentions, is liable to same consequence management guidelines as the harasser. So even a wrong complaint with the objective of harassing somebody can call for her termination, suspension, not getting increments, and all of that. So internal complaints committee also has to keep on sensitizing participants to this investigation, saying, stay very true to what the incident was, what your problem is, and what is it that you want us to address. So anyone, like I said, the complainant, the respondent, and the witnesses thereof, all of them are also liable to facing the consequences in case they wrongly participate or contribute to the investigation process. That's it from me, and thank you. I think it was a great opportunity. It's a very seasoned faculty that I have on this forum, and I do hope that I have somewhere value added to all of you. Open to any questions that you may have.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yes.
This is Hajira Fatima from BCom A, 6th SEM.
Yes, Hajira.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do every organization need to have a prevention of sexual harassment policy, ma'am?
Absolutely, miss. Absolutely.
Where it is actually applicable to the startups, which has single-digit employees.
Yes.
That situations like, do we need this prevention of sexual harassment policies, ma'am?
Right. So like any other act, so if you see a basic act called the Provident Fund, there is always a minimum number which is defined. Okay. Now, like you are saying, that there could be a startup which has the promoter and 2 employees. Okay. So
Yes,
now you may not have a prevention of sexual harassment policy, but they will have something which is called the guideline. So when you join them, they will speak about the culture that it is. Okay, and they will also define saying, when in trouble, come and talk to me. Because when it is very small, it will be the intent is what they will convey to you. Okay, in a team of 2 people, the sexual harassment policy may not happen. That demands a basic quorum to get formed in an organization. Normally, this is considered as a number 20 that reaches, which is when all acts come into full play.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
I'm open to more questions.
There is another question on message box, ma'am. I'll just read out.
Okay.
There will be a great to have some insight on how the harassment concepts should be seen among the students, where the communication is quite informal, friendly, and casual.
So, like I said, friendliness is at both the ends. The choice of words, touching, feeling, and I do understand where you're coming from. Youngsters of today are very different from when I was young, right? Your demonstrations, everything is a lot more physical. You have hand phones with you, etc. But the way the act defines it is that if the woman chooses to say that I find this an offensive act, it is admissible under the Prevention of Sexual Harassment. So that's why people keep saying, learn to draw your boundaries. Another beautiful thing that I can tell you is that if I'm a woman, I'm very comfortable with some men with certain behavior traits, and I'm not comfortable with some other men. So invest in understanding what's that personal space this person is allowing you. You will find that even when amongst in your own classrooms, etc., you will see there are some, from a man to a woman or vice versa, that the person comes and touches you on the shoulder and says, hey, how are you? You're okay with that. But for some people, you're not. So now it is the personal space that the other person has to understand, which is called the emotional intelligence, which is called being mature, right? So somewhere we have to also make ourselves aware of who's comfortable in my presence, who's not. We have equations at some places. We do not have equations in other places. So only when you're a friend, start taking liberties, I can say. But if you're not in that space, don't venture out. It's too much of a risk.
So I have a question, Dee. Is this act linked to only sexual harassment, or is it anything against a particular minority community, etc.?
No. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. You can go on.
So, I mean, jokes of that sense, etc., etc. So I just want to get that clarification.
Yeah. So jokes falls in the category of, so if it's a political joke, which is these days a lot of fights happen over WhatsApp. I've seen groups crumble, groups get formed because there are political ideologies being discussed. Obviously, that harassment is not something which can be entertained under this act. The act is about sexual harassment at the workplace. Now, like I said, workplace could be organized, unorganized. Harassment at times, like I said, even male members at times have come and said, I want to file a complaint. And it may not be sexual, but there are instances where the committee got into action and they said, we will investigate this because this leads to a culture formation. More often than not, organizations will push back and say, if it is POSH, we will put this on under the ICC. So yes, the coverage and the act is about sexual harassment, but may not be other harassment, but men coming and filing a complaint has been instances.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Ma'am, I have got a question. May I?
Yes, please, go on.
Failing to promote an employee because she is a female, can this be considered as a harassment at workplace?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Provided When we do year-end appraisals, promotions, increments, is very, very dear to employees, right? And like it happens, you will have good employees and not such good employees. And like we constantly, the presentation was skewed towards saying men are bad. Even women can choose to use official machineries for wrong purposes. Now, not getting promoted, no way says that I've been harassed sexually. What does this mean? Every organization must ensure there is enough documentation around performance data. There is a year-end review process. There is a feedback mechanism. If we don't document, then at the final point of delivering that letter, it's my word against the other person's word. So good practice, as a result, you would experience when you start your work life, is all good organizations, all startup organizations very consciously invest in capturing the performance data. So should there be a dispute tomorrow, up to a logical point, you can come and bring a lot of data and instances on table and say promotion happened or did not happen because of these factors. But please, tomorrow you lead a team of 10 women in your team, and if you don't promote a woman, it is definitely not an act of sexual harassment.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Ma'am, there's another question posted
Yeah.
here.
Yes.
Vignesh is asking, why is it only concerned with female? Even male get these issues dropped female. I didn't get. Actually.
Absolutely. So, like I said, I think I've said it several times in my presentation. The act was an extension of Vishaka Committee. Vishaka Committee was trying to address the issues of women. These were NGOs in Rajasthan and then few NGOs in the state of Delhi. They became a committee and they were putting up the cases to the state. So it became a Vishaka Committee versus the state. It started as a woman movement. Culturally, we always felt women will be victimized, harassed, and they are the weaker sex, etc. So the act was addressing that. So that's how the narration of the act. But no organization, when they write their internal prevention of sexual harassment policy, say that. So if there is a male member, and there are any number of instances, male member being harassed by a lady boss, male member being harassed by a male boss, any kind of things can happen. And of course, men can come and file their complaint. So the jurisdiction in terms of an organization is not just women.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
I'm very happy to hear the questions actually, and would like to take a few more before we conclude.
Yes, ma'am. I have a question again.
Okay.
Ma'am, generally I'll ask you because I gone through with this session what you have thought here. So you just gave an explanation about what is in sexual harassment briefly by according to an act, and you just said that sexual jokes and verbal threats is also an harassment. If an employee is going through with this situation like sexual jokes on her WhatsApp or somewhere else, so how would that employee should come up and get out of the situation? Because it's just a joke, ma'am. So they may not take it that seriously. Maybe that employee is uncomfortable and she feels that is an harassment for her. So how could she come up with this situation?
So two things here. A sexually toned joke may be just a joke for one woman and maybe a very offensive piece of message that she got for another woman. Our reactions to any stimuli differ. Many women tend to also ignore. I can surely tell you, I ignored a lot of wrong behavior as a youngster traveling in public transport in Delhi. But there were my batchmates who did not. They would go and either physically encounter somebody, etc. So our reactions to a stimuli, and in this case, a not positive stimuli, are different. So it is always the prerogative of the woman concerned. So if she receives a joke, it needn't be repeated act. Maybe it was the first time, but she finds it very offensive. And trust me, there are certain women who get very disturbed when they receive something of this kind. Maybe their family background, maybe they come from very conservative family, maybe they don't have a male member in their family, they don't know how men tend to interact, speak, behave. It upsets them no end. So this is up to them. However, good thing is to do a documentation around what's your problem. So let's say you receive something on your phone. It's a WhatsApp message. Don't delete it if you want to take the route of filing a complaint. Because tomorrow you go and say, I have this problem, and you have no proof. So keep it if it's upsetting you. There are other people who will say, I can't leave this message in my phone. What if my husband sees it? What if my mother sees it? So they will delete it, right? And in that case, they will approach this more at a direct level. Walk up to the person and say that, listen, you did this. I'm warning you. Next time, don't do this to me. And after that, they can take the route. If this person does not give up, continues the wrong behavior. But yes, I would end by saying it's for the woman to decide, is it offensive or not offensive?
Thank you, ma'am.
That's it. Are we done? Okay, I guess there are no more questions, but like
Yes,
I always close my
last
session.
question.
Please, please go on.
Okay. Can sexual harassment be pretended by someone of the same sex?
Of course, of course. Now that the organizations are going and employing people of, like I said, diversity in all areas. So LGBT community is being employed by invitation by organizations, which means we also have to safeguard their interest. We are employing people, organizations are now actually talking on on social media platforms, saying that we employ transgenders, we employ people with special abilities. So when you are inviting people, you also have to make equal opportunity environment for all of them. So same sex, etc., all that is admissible under the act.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
So can I say my concluding comments if no more
Yes, ma'am.
questions?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
So two things here. I have a lot of respect for the Indian Academy today. And we have spoken with certain institutes and colleges, and I have spoken with in certain NGOs on this topic. But for you to reach out to all your faculties and say, everybody come and hear this, tells me that not only are you interested in offering a safe learning environment to the student, you're also very keen to send out ambassadors into the corporate world, into the NGO sector, organized sector, unorganized sector, of people who are aware and people who will build on this understanding. I sincerely hope I've been able to value add to your existing understanding of this topic. I also hope I've been able to extend some amount of confidence to some women who always decided to keep things to themselves. Because as a culture, we teach girls to be more accepting, patient, resilience, accept kar lo, adjust kar lo. So I think it's very nice to see an institution like yours to invest in this space. All my compliments to the senior leadership and faculty members who are here. At any point in time, in any capacity, if I could be of help, assistance in this regard, I'll be very, very happy to do that. With that, thank you very much to all of you, and especially all the student community. I'm also happy to see not many people have logged out from the time we started. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Now let us move to the formal vote of thanks. A very good evening to all. I, Yash Kumar, 6 BCom A. It gives me an immense pleasure to thank everyone who has been an integral part of today's webinar. Today, I take opportunity to put all my gratitude into work to deliver the vote of thanks. On behalf of the Indian Academy Degree College Autonomous Center for Student Placement Services and Anti-Sexual Harassment Committee, in collaboration with My Athena, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude, thank our resource person, Ms. Nidhi Chouhan. Ma'am, indeed your words have spread sexual harassment awareness, what sexual harassment means by act, provision of act, categories and sexual harassment, what are leadership, accountability, and much more. I hope by this, I hope by this, our students have grabbed much knowledge about the topic. Thank you, ma'am. I heart- I heartfully thank our chairman, Dr. T. Somashekar, our secretary, Ms. T. Bharati, our COO, Dr. Srinidhi K. Parthasarathy, and our beloved principal, Dr. E. Zaram Devi. I am fortunate to thank all the head of the departments and faculties. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all the audience and students for showing their interest for this program. I once again thank everyone for making this webinar a great success. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Goodbye and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Nidhi ma'am. It was a wonderful session.